Since you were a child, you've heard that God reigns on a high and eternal throne. But have you ever wondered if that throne moves? This simple question holds one of the most hidden mysteries of spirituality. And perhaps the answer will forever change the way you view heaven. Because if God's throne moves, then what else is constantly changing up there? And more than that, what does this movement mean? What you're about to discover may surprise you, especially if you grew up believing the divine is static, immobile, and unattainable. The scriptures handed down to us speak of a glorious throne, surrounded by winged beings, thunder, and lightning. But amid these grandiose images, there's something few realize. The throne isn't stationary. It rises, moves, is carried by wheels full of eyes, and manifests itself in different forms before those who dare to see. Have you ever experienced this? Have you ever felt there's something in the Bible that isn't spoken in churches? A divine presence that moves between the pages, leaving hidden clues, veiled symbols, truths that seem forbidden? That's exactly what we're going to reveal now. Because within the micro-theme of the origin of divine mysteries, there's a question that echoes from the beginning of creation. Before let there be light, what really moved in the void? Some ancient texts, banned, apocryphal, forgotten, speak of a throne of fire, a living celestial chariot that descends from on high, bringing judgment, revelation, and power. The traditional Bible mentions this, but in a veiled, symbolic way, as if hiding something that only prepared eyes can see. And perhaps you are one of those eyes. Stay with me until the end, because every word from now on will connect to a greater mystery, a mystery involving wheels within wheels, all-seeing eyes, and a throne that has never stood still. And if that throne is moving, is it coming towards us? And if that throne is moving, is it coming towards us? Think about it. A throne that doesn't remain fixed, but traverses dimensions, revealing itself in visions, in dreams, in forgotten fragments of the Word. The move of the throne can mean more than displacement. It can be a sign, a call, a divine echo that vibrates to this day in the hearts of those who sense there is something beyond what has been said from the pulpit. And perhaps you are among those few. If this topic resonates with you, if this idea somehow resonated with you, leave your thoughts in the comments below. What do you believe? Does God's throne move? Or is this just a forgotten metaphor? I read each comment carefully, and many of them inspire me to bring even deeper revelations in future episodes. And if you felt this content was valuable, that it connected you to something greater, please like it right now. This will help the video reach more people who, like you, are searching for spiritual answers that traditional religion has often omitted. And of course, if you want to continue walking with me through these mysteries of creation, subscribe to the channel now. This simple gesture strengthens our community, gives strength to this mission, and shows me that it's worth continuing to bring these hidden truths to light. Because what we're building here isn't just a channel. It's a temple of ancient knowledge, a refuge for seekers, a gathering of souls who still hear the divine whisper behind the veiled history. And the veil is about to open. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject. If God's throne moves, then perhaps what we call eternity is not stagnation, but a living flow. And this idea directly confronts what many have learned since childhood, that God reigns upon a fixed, immutable, untouchable throne. But what if this throne is, in fact, the very expression of the active and dynamic presence of the divine? A living manifestation, moving like the breath of the Spirit, crossing time and dimensions? It's a disturbing question, because it requires you to question what you've been taught as absolute truth. After all, why would there be movement in heaven if everything there is perfect and complete? But what if perfection isn't stagnation, but rather a kind of sacred movement, invisible to human eyes? A movement that isn't physical like ours, but symbolic, spiritual, charged with meaning and eternal impact? Most people never dared ask that question, but the ancient prophets did. Men like Ezekiel, Isaiah, John, they saw the throne. They described it. And the throne they saw wasn't a celestial chair station at some fixed point in the cosmos. It was a living structure, surrounded by thunder, lightning, fire, and beings unlike anything on earth. When Ezekiel recounts his vision, he describes something that defies all logic. Wheels within wheels, full of eyes, moving in every direction without turning. And above these wheels, a firmament, and above the firmament, a throne. And on the throne, a form resembling a man, surrounded by fire. This image, symbolic as it may seem, conveys a hidden truth. The throne of God manifests itself in movement. It appears. It descends. It reveals itself. It is not bound to the high heavens. It comes. It reveals itself. And that changes everything. Because if the throne can move, then it can also visit. It can judge. It can respond. It can act. It is not just a symbol of authority. It is an agent of divine will itself, a living throne, charged with glory, shrouded in presence, guided by the heavenly beings themselves. And why does this matter? Because it transforms our entire mindset about God, from a distant being, sitting in silence, to a God in action, who draws near, who sends signs, who reveals mysteries behind the scenes of reality. This means that creation has never been still, that from the beginning, everything vibrates, pulsates, and moves in tune with this eternal throne. Perhaps this is why so many apocryphal and forgotten texts describe the throne as a divine chariot. The Merkava, a symbol of spiritual movement and ascension, a divine technology, a path between worlds, guided by entities beyond human comprehension. This explains why certain prophets, upon witnessing the throne, fell as if dead. They didn't see just a seat of government. They saw the epicenter of a living force that sustains the universe. And this idea leads us to another important revelation. God's throne is not only in heaven. It appears on earth in visions, in dreams, in moments of spiritual breakthrough. It manifests itself when eternal decisions are being made, when revelations are being delivered, when truth needs to be exposed, when something needs to be transformed. That's why this question, does God's throne move, isn't just theological, it's existential. Because if the throne moves, perhaps it's moving now. Perhaps it's coming toward a generation ready to hear what has been silenced for centuries. Perhaps the throne's movement is a sign that something profound is about to happen, not outside of us, but within. Write in the comments. I'm on this journey too, because only those who feel this calling understand that this search is more than curiosity. It's destiny, and destiny is in motion. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because if there's anything that legitimizes this mysterious vision of the throne in motion, it's Scripture itself, and not in obscure or ambiguous verses, but in clear visions recorded by men who have stood before the unspeakable. One of the most disturbing and symbolic accounts in the entire Bible is found in Ezekiel chapter 1. Many read this passage as purely poetic, but few realize what's truly being described there, a living, flaming structure that defies the laws of physics and logic, a throne that appears shrouded in clouds, lightning, creatures with multiple faces, and wheels within wheels. This detail may seem small, but it isn't, because these aren't just any wheels. They're described as having spirit within them, and wherever the living beings went, the wheels went with them, as if they were part of a single living entity. And within these wheels, eyes, countless eyes, full vision, total vigilance, absolute spiritual perception. This isn't just symbolism. It's coded language to express a hidden truth. The throne of God is not an artifact. It's a presence in action, a platform of divine manifestation that shifts according to supreme will, appearing at critical moments in humanity's spiritual journey. This is what transforms this throne into something even more frightening and beautiful. It is conscious. In the Book of Revelation, chapter 4, we find a similar scene. John, exiled on Patmos, is taken up in the spirit and sees a throne, but not a motionless, distant, unreachable throne. He describes flashes of lightning voices, 7 flaming torches, and before the throne, something like a sea of glass. And once again, living creatures, beings who restlessly declare the eternal holiness of the one seated. They are not seated. They are in motion, in perpetual adoration, in sync with the throne. Now imagine this. 2 prophets, centuries apart, in completely different contexts, recounting experiences that, in essence, describe the same phenomenon, a throne that manifests itself, one that is not fixed in time or space. This reveals a hidden pattern behind the scenes of biblical revelation, an invisible thread that connects the moments when God intervenes directly in history, and almost always with manifestations involving displacement, noise, light, and transformation. This idea has a profound impact because it challenges traditional mindsets. It forces us to see God as movement, not waiting, as action, not just observation. And this resonates with something more intimate, our own desire for a sacredness that moves with us, that walks alongside us, that responds. The moving throne represents more than power. It represents presence. It represents eternal decisions being made, changes taking place, revelations about to unfold. When Ezekiel saw the throne, he was in exile. When John saw the throne, he too was isolated. In moments of pain, silence, and human distance, the throne moved and appeared. That's why these accounts cannot be ignored. They are maps, signs that the divine is not trapped somewhere in the past, nor contained within human religious constructs. It is alive, and it manifests itself, and the throne is proof of this. When the Bible describes these visions, it's not just reporting supernatural events. It's recording ruptures in reality, moments when the veil is torn, and the eternal touches the temporal, and the throne, always the throne, appears as the central point of these ruptures, as if each appearance were a warning. Something great is about to happen. Now consider, what if these visions aren't just about the past, but about spiritual patterns that continue to unfold? What if the throne still moves? What if this movement is linked to the awakening of consciousness, the beginning of prophetic cycles, the breaking of paradigms that have been imposed for centuries? Perhaps that's why the stories are so visceral and so misunderstood, because they weren't meant to fit into doctrines. They were meant to disturb, to reveal, to provoke those who still feel that the truth isn't fully revealed, and that there's something greater waiting to be revealed. Comment here. That makes sense to me, because only those who truly feel this restlessness understand that this throne still has something to say. And perhaps it is moving now. Now I want to go even deeper into the subject, because by now you may have realized that God's throne cannot, and perhaps never could, be understood as an object. What if it is not merely a symbolic seat of authority, but rather a living extension of the divine presence itself, a nucleus of spiritual consciousness, pulsating within and outside of time, that manifests when cycles need to be broken, when something needs to be restored, or when a hidden truth needs to emerge? Imagine that the throne is not a mobile structure, but a kind of entity, a being, a center of force that thinks, feels, and decides, not in a human way, but in a pure, absolute way. This changes everything, because it ceases to be about a God sitting far away in a static heaven, and becomes about a God who reveals himself through movement, a God whose living presence manifests itself through the throne itself, as if the one who reigns or fused with the one who carries it. This perspective may seem bold, even dangerous, to those who grew up believing there are clear boundaries between symbol and reality. But in many ancient spiritual traditions, including those outside the Hebrew tradition, the divine throne is not just a king's seat. It is the king in manifest form. It is presence itself, taking visible form to impact creation. And when you begin to see it from this perspective, everything begins to make sense. The fire, the wheels, the eyes, the beings, these are not props. They are layers of expression, layers of an entity that does not need to speak, because its very presence communicates the divine decision. And if this sounds far from reality, it's worth remembering. The throne appears precisely at moments when reality is about to be transformed. When Ezekiel saw it, Jerusalem was about to fall. When John beheld it, judgment was being revealed. In both cases, the throne didn't just appear. It manifested itself with such impact that the prophets could barely describe what they were seeing. And this impact wasn't just aesthetic. It was spiritual. It was a presence that transformed everything around it. Perhaps this is why so many traditions speak of the throne as a divine chariot, the Merkava, as if it were also a vehicle, not in the mechanical sense, but in the energetic sense, a means of transition between worlds, an instrument through which glory moves. And this is where we come to a more sensitive point. If the throne is a living entity, this means that it chooses where to appear. It is not invoked by human rituals, nor does it move on a whim. It appears when a divine purpose is at hand, when there is something that needs to be sealed, revealed, judged, or initiated. And this presence is so intense that, even in visions, the prophets could not remain standing. They fell, they trembled, they fell silent, because the throne, when it manifests, carries an energy that transcends everything we know is real. It is as if the very fabric of creation were torn and remade before it, as if all that is false evaporated, and only what is eternal remained. This idea isn't just mystical. It has direct implications for our spiritual journey. Because if the throne of God is alive, then it is still moving today. It doesn't belong to a bygone era. It's not a dead image in an ancient book. It is an active presence. It reveals itself where there is space, where there is thirst, where there is truth. And when we begin to open ourselves to this vision, something changes within us. The search ceases to be for explanations and becomes for communion. It ceases to be about understanding God as a concept and begins to be about feeling the presence, perceiving the signs, listening to the whispers behind the veil. And when this happens, you realize that everything is connected, that the throne is not just a celestial structure. It is the meeting point between the eternal and the present, between the invisible and the impact. And in this encounter, something always moves, something within us, as if the throne itself were calling us back to the beginning, to the place where it all began, and where everything still pulses. Comment here. I feel this living presence. Because sometimes all the throne needs to manifest itself is a listening heart. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because it is impossible to speak of the throne of God as a living entity without touching on texts that have been forgotten, erased, or simply ignored by traditional theology, those writings that did not make it into the canonical Bible, but that persist in the background of history, like voices whispering truths that many preferred not to hear. And among these texts, few are as provocative as the Book of Enoch. It describes a throne engulfed in living fire, not just symbolic fire, but a pulsating, moving, breathing fire, a throne burning with spiritual intensity, surrounded by flaming angels, speaking lightning, and a light that blinds even celestial beings themselves. Enoch doesn't just recount a vision. He describes direct contact with a living, incandescent, conscious divine structure. And most intriguingly, he didn't just see the throne, he was taken to it. He was guided by angels through portals of light, traversing layers of reality that escape our comprehension, as if he had crossed the backstage of creation, being taken to the center of all eternal decisions. And what this reveals to us is even more disturbing. The throne is a place, but it is also a state, a physical and, at the same time, vibrational point. It exists on a plane where space and time dissolve, where truth is not told, but felt. It is as if, upon approaching the throne, every lie disintegrates, every mask falls, and everything impure, everything that is not essence, is consumed by the conscious fire that dwells around it. Other ancient texts reinforce the same view. Apocryphal and mystical Jewish writings speak of Merkava, the divine chariot. But unlike the idea of a simple celestial vehicle, it is described as a living, complex, multi-layered structure guarded by indescribable beings. A chariot that is not just a means of transportation, but an instrument of revelation, a vehicle of consciousness that connects the throne to the material world. What's more, it only manifests itself to those who undergo rigorous processes of inner purification, spiritual transformation, and mind expansion. These texts, often labeled as heretical, offer a rawer, more direct, and more impactful vision of the sacred. There is no room for passivity in them. God is not a static figure awaiting prayers. He is strength, movement, and decisiveness. And his throne, this epicenter of presence, is the clearest manifestation of this power. That's why, when these texts are ignored, more than information is lost. Depth is lost. The opportunity to understand that, from the beginning, a broader spiritual language is being spoken, a language not limited to the letter, but vibrates between the lines. A language that still resonates in those who dare to seek it. And it is precisely here that this journey becomes even more personal. Because perhaps, on some level, the throne still reveals itself to those willing to see beyond the obvious, to let go of dogma, open their minds, and listen with their spirit. Perhaps it still appears in dreams, in moments of profound silence, in fragments of light that emerge when the heart is surrendered and the soul is ready. Perhaps it never stopped moving. We just stopped looking in the right direction. This possibility completely changes the way we view spirituality. It stops being about empty rituals, about obligations. It becomes about alignment, about perception, about becoming someone the throne can visit. Because if this presence exists, and if it remains alive, burning, and conscious, then it doesn't just need to be observed, it can be found. Write it down. I feel this calling, because whoever feels knows. And who knows, you've already started to remember. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because if the throne is alive, conscious, and moves like a presence in action, then everything around it also carries its own language. Nothing is placed there by chance. And it is at this point that symbolism takes center stage. When Ezekiel describes God's throne, he doesn't just speak of fire and wheels. He speaks of eyes, countless eyes. And these eyes aren't on God's face. They're on the wheels that support the throne. They're on the living beings that accompany it. They're everywhere, as if the divine structure itself were made of vision. But what kind of vision is this? This is not the limited, physical vision known to humans. It is absolute vision. Full awareness, the ability to see all that was, is, and will be, all at once. The eyes of the throne do not observe, they discern. They penetrate what is hidden. They traverse time. They see beyond appearances. And this symbolism is a warning. No one stands before the throne and remains hidden. Now, consider the spiritual impact of this. The presence of the throne is not just light. It is exposure. And exposure brings transformation, because only when the truth is fully seen can it be healed. Only when the invisible is brought to light can the spirit be confronted with its true condition. Therefore, the presence of the eyes on the throne carries a power that does not judge with words. It judges with clarity. And this clarity is a kind of judgment, not punitive, but revealing. And the living beings, they are no ordinary creatures. Ezekiel describes them with multiple faces, the face of a man, a lion, an ox, an eagle. Each face represents a dimension of creation, the human, the wild, the laborious, the spiritual. These beings are like bridges between worlds. They connect the throne to creation, and creation to the throne. They are in constant motion, in perfect synchrony with the wheels, as if they were an extension of divine thought itself. And even with multiple faces, they act as one. This speaks volumes about unity in the midst of diversity, about how God manifests his fullness through distinct forms, yet always connected to a single essence. And the most curious thing is that these beings are also full of eyes. This means that the throne not only sees, it multiplies its vision, it shares its consciousness, it distributes perception, as if creation itself were being invited to see with the eyes of the eternal. And when this vision is activated, nothing remains the same, because it's not just about seeing the world, but about perceiving what lies behind it. This symbolism wasn't placed there to embellish the text. It carries profound spiritual codes. The moving throne, supported by wheels with eyes, surrounded by multifaceted beings, reveals a pattern of divine operation. Vision generates direction. Direction generates movement. Movement reveals intention. And the intention of the throne has always been revelation. Therefore, when this structure appears, it doesn't just come to reign. It comes to adjust, to align, to restore. And it all begins with vision. The all-seeing eyes don't judge as humans do. They don't get lost in appearances. They go straight to the essence. And this is both frightening and liberating, because before the throne there is no lying, but also there is no unseeing. And being seen by the throne is not being rejected. It is being recognized. It is being called back to one's place of origin. It is being reminded of who one is, before the fall, before the pain, before oblivion. And here's a truth that could shake up everything you believed until now. Perhaps the throne is moving, because it's looking for eyes willing to see with it. Comment here, I want to see with the eyes of the throne. Because sometimes the beginning of transformation is precisely wanting to see what has always been hidden. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because if the throne of God is in fact a living entity full of eyes, supported by conscious beings in constant movement, then it is not just involved in history. It is at the origin of everything. And this idea completely changes the way we understand creation. Because perhaps before the sound, before the voice, even before let there be light, there was a shift, a silent movement, yet charged with eternal intention. The throne leaning over the waters of the abyss, the divine presence approaching the void. The very language of Genesis carries an atmosphere charged with mystery. The text says that the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. But hovering, in this context, is not simply being. It is moving with purpose. It is circling, enveloping, probing. The implicit idea there is of a presence that moves, that examines, that prepares. And if the Spirit is in motion, the throne, as the center of that presence, is also. This leads us to consider that creation may not have begun with a word, but with an approach, a sacred step, an invisible gesture that marked the beginning of time, space, and consciousness. The movement of the throne may have been the first act of eternity interacting with nothingness, as if God himself had leaned, with all his glory, over chaos, and his approach was enough to bring about order, light, and life. This vision transforms the idea of creation into something more intimate, more organic. It wasn't a distant command. It was a conscious manifestation, an involvement, a divine decision to move. And where the throne moves, something is activated, because the throne doesn't just carry government. It carries intention. It carries with it the weight of eternal will. And this will, touching the primordial chaos, doesn't just organize it, it awakens it. In this scenario, creation is not a technical project. It is a spiritual gesture, an encounter, an impact, and perhaps the sound of "Let There Be Light" was merely the reverberation of something deeper, the invisible movement of the divine presence piercing absolute silence. The universe was born from a sound, yes, but the sound was born from movement, and the movement of the throne. This changes the way we view not only the beginning of history, but our own existence. Because if it all began with a moving throne, then perhaps creation is still happening. Perhaps it never stopped. Perhaps it is an ongoing process, a spiraling journey, where the divine continues to move, visiting, revealing, adjusting. And perhaps every moment of revelation in human history is, in fact, another instance of the throne moving. This realization confronts us with a choice: to continue seeing creation as something distant, locked in an unreachable past, or to recognize that we are part of a greater movement, a spiritual flow that began in the beginning and still vibrates in the present, a flow that invites us to perceive reality through different eyes, no longer spectators, but as conscious participants in a sacred dance between the invisible and the visible. And it is here that a hidden truth emerges, one that shakes the very fabric of the mind. If the throne moved over chaos to initiate creation, doesn't it move over our chaos today to generate a new creation? Does that same gesture, silent and eternal, still occur every time we are about to undergo a profound inner transformation? Doesn't the throne lean over us when everything seems dark, confused, and formless? Perhaps that's why there are moments when we feel a presence that can't be explained, yet changes everything. A feeling that something is about to be born, even without the right words. What if this feeling is the echo of that first movement? If it's a throne once again approaching? Comment here: I feel this movement in me. Because maybe the same gesture that started the universe is about to awaken something inside you. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject. Because if we truly understand that God's throne moves, that it is not a fixed object, but a conscious, living manifestation that traverses dimensions with purpose, then we need to reconsider everything we call sacred. And not just in heaven, but here, now. The moving throne is not just a biblical figure to be admired. It is an active symbol that judgment, glory, and creation are not isolated events. They are always on the move. Judgment not in the punitive sense, but in the sense of revelation. That which is false begins to fall when the true presence approaches. Glory not as something distant and unattainable, but as an invisible impact that transforms everything around it when the throne passes. And creation as an energy that never stops, that pulsates, that is reborn within us every time we open our spiritual eyes to see beyond matter. This vision takes us out of passivity. It invites us to spiritual responsibility, because if the throne moves, it also visits, and every visit carries a decision. Every manifestation demand a response. We can't continue living the same way after having felt this silent call coming from the center of eternity, because the throne doesn't appear by chance. It appears when something needs to change. Perhaps that's why so many people today feel a restlessness they can't quite name, a sense that the world is changing from within, that something is stirring behind the scenes of reality. What if this something is, once again, the throne in motion? What if it's a divine presence approaching a time that needs to be adjusted, healed, restored? The most intriguing thing is to realize that this manifestation is never noisy. It doesn't impose itself as a spectacle. It moves silently, like a gentle breeze, like a subtle shift that is only perceived by those who slow down, by those who are silent, by those who surrender. The throne doesn't reach where there's shouting. It reveals itself where there's space. And that space is sometimes our own inner chaos. The symbolism of wheels, eyes, beings, and fire is powerful, but none of it makes sense unless applied to the actual journey. Because the greatest mystery lies not in the throne's form. It lies in what it provokes, in what it activates, in what it demands of those who contemplate it. When it moves, everything around it must align. And perhaps that's why so many resist its approach, because they know that nothing remains the same afterward. But what if it wasn't about fear? What if it was about acceptance? About allowing this living presence to bring order to what was disorganized, vision to what was dark, direction to what was lost? What if this movement isn't an end, but the beginning of a new creation within us? The hidden truth that many ignore is that the throne is in progress, not only in heaven, but on earth, not only in history, but in consciousness. And each time a heart awakens to this, a new part of reality reveals itself, as if the veils of the mind begin to fall, and the light that has always been there can finally penetrate. Comment here, the throne is on the march. Because when this phrase makes sense, it is a sign that the presence has already begun to move within you. If you've made it this far, it's a sign that something in this content truly touched you. Maybe it was an image, an idea, or simply the feeling that someone finally spoke about something you've always felt but never been able to explain. And that's why this channel exists, so we can journey together through these spiritual territories that almost no one has the courage to explore. If this message resonated with you, if something inside you was awakened while listening, subscribe to the channel, not out of obligation, but because this space is yours too. It's where we continue to access hidden truths, rebuild our mindsets, and deepen this journey. And so I know you really stayed with me until the end. Comment below. I'm with you until the end. This sentence, for me, is worth more than 1,000 likes. But if you felt connected to everything we discussed here, leave a like too. This helps this content reach other seekers, other restless souls who, like you, feel there's something more behind creation. And while we're at it, there's a video right here that complements everything we talk about today. Click and stay with me there. There's more revelation awaiting you.